The title I chose for my text set assignment is called Families Matter. My central question for this text set is, how can multicultural texts teach students about the importance of family? It's important for students to learn about their family's cultures because it forms parts of their identity. It also allows students of varying cultures to come together and recognize similarities and differences between cultures and families. The three books that I chose for my text set are The Great Big Book of Families, The Patchwork Quilt, and Too Many Tamales. I chose these texts because they are varying in cultural backgrounds, but share the common theme of family relationships and how those relationships affect a student's identity and individuality. I chose The Great Big Book of Families because it's a text that celebrates all kinds of families, the lives they live together, the cultural traditions, home life, and family relationships. I thought this would be a great book to start with first because it opens up a dialogue about families. The students are able to identify with their own family, identifying traditions, cultural beliefs, and things they like to do with their families that may be similar or different from other cultural family traditions. The second book I chose for my text set is called Too Many Tamales by Gary Soto. In this text, Maria is cooking tamales for a Christmas tradition. This text allows the students to get a glimpse inside a culture's tradition, gets them thinking about their own cultural traditions and how they participate in those traditions in their own home. For example, in Too Many Tamales, it's a cultural tradition for Maria's family to cook tamales during Christmas time. At Christmas time in my family, we participate in the Italian tradition called the 7 Fishes of the Sea. We choose fishes that represent certain hopes and dreams that we have for the future, such as health, love, family, and friendship. It's something that we do every single year during Christmas, and it's a great tradition that has been passed down in our family, and I think it parallels well with Maria's tamale tradition with her own family. The third book I chose is entitled The Patchwork Quilt. Patchwork Quilt is a great picture book that discusses the relationship between a child and her grandmother. Grandmother has passed down the skill of sewing to her mother and is now introducing this skill to her granddaughter. They enjoy patching and working together and making quilts, and it becomes an important heirloom in her family. This tradition gets passed down from their family member to family member. These three texts were weaved together because there are wonderful examples of family relationships and cultural traditions and beliefs from 3 separate cultures. Reading these texts will allow the students to identify a tradition and attach it to their own that could be shared with a peer. The goal that I set for this text set aims to inform the students on the importance of family interactions and the effect that these interactions have on their identity and individuality. Through analyzing these texts, the students will be able to compare and contrast events and experiences in their own lives. The age of appropriateness that I found for these texts would be 2nd to 3rd grade. In this case, I will be using the texts in a 4th grade classroom of varying cultures and backgrounds. By using these texts in a 4th grade classroom, it's my hope that it would be able to deepen their understanding of cultural differences and family interactions and apply that understanding to themselves as well as their peers. The first book that I would use is called The Great Big Book of Families. I would use this as a springboard for the students to springboard the students into thinking about their families, what a family is, and how their family helps create their identity and individuality. Through family interactions, students are introduced to various cultural traditions and beliefs that affect who they are as a person. My before reading strategy would be an artist's rendering of what their family looks like. I would use the question, what is a family? What does the family look like? What does your family look like? Hopefully these questions will allow the students to think about what their families look like to the outside world. During this lesson, the students would have a brainstorming activity where we would stop at certain points in the text and start completing the phrase, "A family is blank." The students can choose answers that pop into their head based on their own families. And as we are reading the text, we will continue to add more ideas to the chart in order to foster an academic conversation about the similarities and differences between families and different cultures. Our after reading activity will be a partner interview activity where the students will choose a partner to work together to complete this assignment. The students will talk about their family members, ask questions about their partner's family, and ask questions about any traditions they participate in as a family. The goal of this lesson will be for students to realize that each person has their own family similarities and differences and traditions and beliefs based on their culture that they may share and will be similar or could be different. Too Many Tamales by Gary Soto is a great book to use to discuss cultural traditions. This allows students to identify something they do during the holidays that may be similar or different from something a friend does in class. Like I previously mentioned, we are an Italian family, so we eat fish on Christmas Eve as part of the tradition of hopes and dreams and having health, love, friendship for the upcoming year. It's important for students to realize that some traditions they participate in are similar or different from some traditions that their peers participate in. Before we read Too Many Tamales, I would have the students complete an activity where they discuss some exciting things that their family participates in each year. The students will take some time to jot down these experiences, these traditions, things they do with their family before we start reading, and we'll revisit these exciting traditions for our after reading activity. During the reading of our text, the students will discuss a holiday tradition that's going on inside Maria's house at the moment, and if there's anything in the story that they can relate to, if there's a specific food that they eat during that time, if there's a specific gathering they have, if there's something they do on a holiday that's specific to their culture. Maybe they eat specific foods, maybe they listen to specific songs, maybe there's something that they do traditionally during that time of the year that they can compare and contrast with Maria's family in Too Many Tamales. After we finish reading the text, the students will participate in a Think, Pair, Share. They'll go back to their traditional reflection and discuss one exciting tradition a family participates in each year. Pick out some similarities and differences between their family, Maria's family, and their partner's family. They'll pick out some differences between their family, Maria's family, and their partner's family, and really create a chart of understanding, comparing, and contrasting those traditions. Before we start reading our final book called The Patchwork Quilt, students will participate in a chart talk where the students will talk about some of the talents or skills they've learned from someone in their family. It could be a sports skill, it could be a musical skill, an artistic skill, a cooking skill, anything that they've learned from a family member that may or may not have been passed down through the generations. While reading the story, I will stop at a certain section in the text where Tanya's grandmother says, "A quilt won't forget. It can tell your story." And really stop and digest that quote and think about, what does that mean? What does that mean to Tanya's family? What does that quote represent in Tanya's life? After reading the text, the students will participate in a life quilt activity. The students will comprise a list of 9 important life events, and they will create a quilt by putting it together and present that quilt to the class. The goal of this activity will be for students to identify the similarities and differences between themselves and their peers. There will be some cultural similarities and some cultural differences that will come up and really foster an open academic conversation about cultural backgrounds. Some interdisciplinary connections could be, obviously, historical connections, connections that we can reach in social studies. We can explain to our students that ancestors, they could make their own clothes, they created their own clothes, they played cultural music, they ate cultural foods, they handed down heirlooms from generation to generation. The students could see authentic examples of the clothing worn by members if they made them. Okay, heirlooms that they bring in, something that has cultural background, some rich cultural background that will really engage the students in historical context. Language arts. The students can create journals about their families, biopoems, contrast poems, really discuss the differences between the family members, how family members affected them, how the culture affects them, and or how one person's family differs from the other. Some artistic connections, since we'll be learning about a number of cultures and backgrounds, the students will be able to listen to some examples of authentic music of these said cultures. The students can participate in making cultural food dishes, art projects, playing cultural musical instruments. They can really delve into the arts and the mediums and really think about how family interactions, how the cultures, how the backgrounds really affect them as a person. Reflecting on this activity, I really found that it's important to choose appropriate texts for your students that describe and introduce them to accurate and authentic examples of the culture. It's also important for students to understand the major roles that families play in their development of individuality and identity and their personal identity. And finally, it's important for students to really understand the similarities and differences between their culture and the culture of their peers and how they can develop an acceptance and tolerance for things that are different. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.